What's up, guys? Welcome back to the workshop. It's great to have you here. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about and making some drifts. For those of you who don't exactly know what a drift is or what it does, it's basically a tool that you use to change the size and shape of a hole that you've punched in steel. For example, if you were going to look at this hammer right here, obviously every hammer has a hole punched in it, and that's called the hammer eye. But if you were going to cut this hammer in half, you'd notice that the top of the eye and the bottom are the widest parts of the eye, and the center is the narrowest part. So it basically creates kind of an hourglass taper in there, and that allows you to drive a wooden wedge into the top of the handle, which spreads the handle open and locks the handle into the hammer. The same exact principle applies to axe handles. The drifts are tapered, and that creates an hourglass shape inside the eye, and you can drive the wedge in and it locks it in the same way. Another thing about these drifts is that they're made out of a steel called H13, which is a really tough, hardy steel, especially when it's hot. Now, obviously, since this is a blacksmithing channel, most of you guys know that when you heat up steel, it allows you to bend it and manipulate it and squish it. But H13 is really resistant to that. So even if this thing is red hot, it really doesn't change shape that well, which is great for a drift because a lot of times you're sticking this drift into a hot hammer or hot axe, and this will actually heat up to the point where it's glowing red. So you don't want a steel that will deform and change shape if it's red, but the problem is that trying to forge these things is a nightmare. I don't want to say impossible, but it's really, really hard to forge these by hand, and with a press it's even pretty difficult. So I'm going to show you guys how to do this with a press. You could try your best to do it with a hand hammer, or maybe if you had a person with a sledgehammer striking for you, it would be a little easier. But I'm going to show you how to do it with the press, so let's get started. So first I'm starting off by drawing out the material underneath the hydraulic press. I'm just using some round dies that I made out of 2-inch round steel that I cut in half. You can see these dies are pretty aggressive, but they don't leave the best surface finish, so pretty soon I'm going to switch over to some square dies. Ideally, I wish I started with material that was closer to the final shape I was going to forge, but this is what I had, so I kind of had to work with it. Now I'm just using these square dies to clean everything up and continue to draw out the taper. It's also pretty important to keep this steel pretty hot just because it's so heat resistant. It's really not worth forging at lower temperatures just because it doesn't really even move. So it's good to keep the steel nice and hot. And also make sure you forge a nice even taper because any inconsistencies in the taper will directly translate to your hammer eye. So now I'm drawing it out as a square, but eventually I'm going to flip it on its edges and forge down those corners just to make an octagon shape. I'm continuing to draw out the material. Eventually this is going to be about a foot to 14 inches long. Right now I'm forging in a little handle. I'm keeping this handle square, but then I flip it on its corners just to knock those corners off a little bit to make it more comfortable to hold. And then I just flip it around long ways under the dies to straighten out the handle. Right now I'm using a flatter. A flatter like this is normally used under a power hammer, but I found it works pretty well under a hydraulic press too. This really smooths out the surface. And also I'm focusing most of the energy on just two sides because you do want the drift to be an oval shape. If you look at a hammer, pretty much every hammer eye is going to be an oval shape, not round. So it's good to focus most of your forging on those two sides. Then I just brought it over to the anvil, and with the hand hammer, I'm just cleaning everything up one last time and making sure it's nice and straight. Now I just got it clamped up in the vise, and I'm using a regular angle grinder with a grinding disc just to do some heavy stock removal and also get rid of all that scale and knock off those corners from the octagon. Now I just switched over to a flap disc, and it just makes a much nicer surface finish than a regular grinding disc. Now I'm just cleaning up the handle again, making sure there are no sharp corners. Now I just ran it over to the belt grinder just to make sure the tips of the drift are nice and rounded. I don't want the drift to mar up the hammer you're using or the hammer you're making. So now I just threw it back in the forge, and I'm heating up the one end that you're going to hit with your hammer, and I'm just going to take that end and put it in this stuff called vermiculite. And what vermiculite does is it allows the steel to cool much slower. It insulates it, which basically anneals this type of steel because H13 is an air hardening steel, so if I were just to heat it up and let it cool in air, it would be really hard and it would most likely mar up your hammer. So doing this makes the drift softer than your hammer. So here's the finished product. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something from it. And before you go, I just want to remind you to give this video a thumbs up, comment, and make sure you check out all the links in the description below. There's a link to my Instagram, my website, and there's also a bunch of Amazon affiliate links. So if you guys ever want to buy something from Amazon, make sure you use one of my links. It helps me out a lot. I would really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.